The moment you pull your energy back from someone, an invisible shift takes place. It's not something they can see right away, but they can feel it. People become accustomed to a certain level of attention, effort, and emotional investment from others. The more you give, the more they expect. But the moment you step back, when you detach, something interesting happens. The dynamic changes completely. When you detach, you create space. That space is where realization happens. That space is where someone starts questioning things. It forces them to reconsider your presence, your absence, and the balance of power that was once in their favor. Human nature is wired to resist loss. When we have something or someone, we assume it will always be there. We take things for granted, not because we mean to, but because we become familiar with them. But the moment something is no longer readily available, the value of it suddenly increases. Think about your own experiences. Have you ever been in a situation where you didn't truly appreciate something until it was gone? Maybe it was a relationship, a friendship, or even a job. You didn't think much about it when it was there, but the second it was gone, it started to weigh on your mind. You started thinking about what went wrong, what you could have done differently, and why things changed. That's because human psychology is wired to react to absence more than presence. We don't feel the weight of something until it is missing. Now, apply this to personal relationships. When you consistently give your time, attention, and emotions to someone, they become accustomed to it. They know you will always be there, always responding, always making an effort. But what happens when you pull that effort back? They notice. And not only do they notice, they feel it deeply. At first, they may not react. They may act indifferent. But over time, the absence starts to grow in their mind. They begin to wonder why you are no longer responding the way you used to. They begin to question if they lost you. This is where the real power of detachment comes in. It's not about manipulation. It's not about playing games. It's about recognizing that your energy is valuable. And when you give too much without receiving in return, you tip the scales out of balance. The moment you reclaim that energy, you restore that balance. And the other person, they feel the shift. They feel the weight of what they took for granted. Most people operate on the assumption that relationships and interactions will always remain the same. They expect the same level of investment, the same availability, the same emotional presence. But the second that changes, it forces a reevaluation. They have to question why things are different. They have to ask themselves if they did something to push you away. They have to face the reality that they may have lost something they thought was guaranteed. Detachment also has a powerful effect on your own mindset. When you are constantly giving energy to someone who does not appreciate it, you are depleting yourself. You are investing in a situation that is not giving you a return. But when you detach, when you redirect that energy inward, you begin to feel a shift within yourself. You start to regain clarity. You start to see the situation for what it truly is. You realize that your attention was being drained by someone who didn't deserve it in the first place. The irony is that the more you chase, the more you push someone away. When you are overly available, overly invested, it creates an illusion of certainty. That person feels no urgency to reciprocate because they assume you will always be there. But when you remove yourself, when you stop chasing, you introduce a new emotion into the equation: uncertainty. And uncertainty is what makes people react. When someone is no longer sure of your place in their life, they begin to think about you more. They start questioning if they made a mistake. They start feeling the absence you created. The power of detachment is not just about making someone miss you. It's about realigning your own energy so that you are not constantly chasing validation from someone who is not reciprocating it. It's about recognizing that when you step back, when you stop giving so much, you allow the other person to come to their own realization. And that realization is often far more powerful than anything you could have said or done. People feel the weight of what they ignored when it is no longer accessible. They begin to understand the value of what they took for granted when they can no longer reach it. Detachment forces them to reflect, to question, to wonder. And the moment they start doing that, the power dynamic shifts entirely. People are drawn to what they perceive as valuable. The mind naturally assigns value to things based on their availability and scarcity. This is why gold is more valuable than common metals, why rare collectibles are more sought after, and why people chase what they feel they cannot easily have. This principle applies not only to material things, but also to human relationships and interactions. The more available something is, the less people tend to appreciate it. The moment something becomes scarce, people's desire for it intensifies. This is the same principle that governs human psychology when it comes to attention, love, and respect. When you are always present, always available, and always giving, people unconsciously begin to take your presence for granted. They may not intend to, but their mind starts registering your attention as something that is guaranteed, something that does not require effort or appreciation. And when something feels guaranteed, the urgency to value it disappears. But when that same thing is suddenly removed, when your presence is no longer easily accessible, it triggers an emotional shift. The absence creates a void, and that void creates curiosity, uncertainty, and even regret. This is why people often realize the value of something only when it's no longer in front of them. People rarely notice the air they breathe until they struggle to catch it. The same principle applies to relationships. When you give too much of yourself without creating a sense of value, you become like the air. Something always there, something unnoticed. But the moment you step back, the moment you become scarce, you suddenly become something that they start to think about, something they start to desire again. Scarcity creates demand. This is why people chase what runs away and ignore what is always within reach. It's not that they do it intentionally, it's a subconscious reaction. This is why emotional availability must be balanced. If you are always the one initiating conversations, always the one reaching out, always the one putting in effort, the other person has no reason to increase their investment. They do not feel the need to chase, to put in work, or to appreciate your presence. But if you step back, if you stop giving freely, they are forced to confront the reality that your attention is not unlimited. They start to realize that what they once had without effort now requires action to regain. That realization alone is enough to shift their perspective entirely. There is a reason why people remember those who walked away more than those who stayed. The absence of something creates a stronger impact than its presence. The mind lingers on what is lost far more than what is available. This is why people obsess over relationships that ended, over people who moved on without them, over situations where they were ignored or left wondering. Their mind wants to resolve the discomfort of not having closure, of not understanding why something that was once there is now gone. That discomfort makes them value it more. When you withhold your energy, you are not being cold or manipulative. You are simply allowing people to understand your worth without forcing them to. When someone has to wonder about you, they start to appreciate you. When they are unsure of where they stand with you, they start putting in effort. When they don't have full access to you, they start realizing how much they actually need you. It's human nature to chase what seems just out of reach, to desire what is not guaranteed. The very act of becoming less available makes people feel the need to secure what they previously overlooked. The biggest mistake people make is believing that constant availability will make them more valued. They think that if they always give, always prove themselves, always remind someone of their presence, then that person will appreciate them more. But the opposite is true. People do not appreciate what is handed to them effortlessly. They appreciate what they had to work for. The moment you make yourself scarce, the moment you stop overextending yourself, you create the illusion of exclusivity. You become something that is not easily attained, and that alone increases your perceived value. Look at the way people react to luxury items, exclusive invitations, or hard-to-get opportunities. The harder something is to obtain, the more valuable it seems. The same applies to you. If you're always available, always saying yes, always chasing, your presence loses its significance. But the moment you step back, the moment you show that your time and attention are not given freely, people start to see you differently. They start realizing that having access to you is a privilege, not a right. And once they realize that, their entire behavior towards you begins to change. The emotional reaction of someone who realizes they may be losing something or someone important is one of the most powerful forces in human relationships. It's as if the fear of loss, the anxiety of not knowing where they stand, sparks a deep, almost primal response. The uncertainty of whether or not you will remain accessible creates an emotional reaction that can stir up regret, frustration, and even desperation. These emotions are the result of not knowing where they stand with you, and that emotional turmoil is the key to their realization of how much you truly meant to them. When someone no longer has the comfort of knowing you will always be there, their perspective shifts. They begin to question what went wrong. They begin to analyze their behavior and wonder if they've pushed you away, if they've ignored your needs, or if they've taken you for granted. This uncertainty weighs on them more than any direct confrontation could. It forces them to reflect on their own actions, their own decisions, and their own mistakes. The absence of your presence amplifies their emotional state because it's no longer something they can rely on. And it's this emotional realization that often leads them to appreciate what they lost. People are conditioned to seek stability in their relationships. They want to know that they have a certain level of control, that they are in a comfortable, predictable space where things will remain constant. When you pull back, when you stop giving so much, you create the instability they didn't expect. Instability breeds uncertainty, and uncertainty creates emotional discomfort. The discomfort of not knowing what will happen next or whether they will be able to regain what they had forces a deeper introspection. They start to question their role in the relationship, their behavior, and whether they have been taking you for granted. At first, they might not show this discomfort outwardly. They might pretend that they are unaffected, that your absence doesn't matter. But deep inside, they are beginning to feel the absence of something they once had access to. It becomes a silent ache that slowly grows as time passes. They may not even realize the depth of their feelings until they are confronted with the possibility of losing you permanently. It is in this space of uncertainty and emotional discomfort that people begin to realize the true value of what they had. This emotional turmoil also sparks a desire for resolution. When someone is unsure of where they stand, when they're confronted with the fear of losing something important, they are driven to take action. That's when they begin to reach out, when they start seeking answers, when they start wondering if it's too late to make things right. The fear of loss, the discomfort of not knowing, creates the motivation to change. Without that emotional discomfort, they might never have taken a deeper look at their behavior, their actions, and the impact they had on the relationship. The emotional shift that comes from detaching yourself or stepping back is not only felt by the person who might be losing you, but it also has an effect on their behavior. They become more self-aware. They start evaluating the situation with more care and attention because they know that their future with you is no longer guaranteed. It's as if the emotional discomfort pushes them to make things right, to put in more effort, to show that they value you. They don't want to lose something they took for granted, and they are willing to change their behavior to try to fix the situation. It's also important to note that the discomfort isn't always a negative thing. Sometimes the fear of loss and the emotional realization that comes from uncertainty can be a turning point. It can lead to growth, both in the relationship and within the individual. They may come to recognize where they went wrong, where they could have done better, and how they can improve in the future. It is this self-awareness that allows them to transform, to value the relationship more, and to respect the boundaries that were previously overlooked. As human beings, we are naturally inclined to resist discomfort, but it's through discomfort that growth happens. When someone is faced with the emotional discomfort of not knowing where they stand with you, they are forced to reflect on their actions and reassess their priorities. The discomfort pushes them to change, to reevaluate their approach, and to consider what they might lose if they don't act. This process of emotional reflection is critical because it leads to change, and without that change, relationships cannot evolve or improve. What's powerful about emotional discomfort is that it's not something that can be ignored indefinitely. The more someone experiences this uncertainty, the more it nags at them, the more it disrupts their emotional peace. They can try to suppress it, to pretend that they are unaffected, but the feeling doesn't go away. It becomes a constant undercurrent of their thoughts and emotions, forcing them to address it. And in that process, they begin to realize just how much they took you and your presence for granted. They begin to see your value in a new light. And that emotional awakening is what often leads to change. When someone feels ignored, their mind begins to overanalyze every detail of the situation. They start replaying past interactions, searching for clues, questioning what changed, and wondering if they did something wrong. This mental spiral is not just about missing a person. It's about the uncertainty that comes with feeling disconnected from something that once felt secure. People naturally crave validation and emotional security. And when that is suddenly removed, it creates a void that their mind is desperate to fill. That void becomes an obsession, not because they necessarily want you back, but because they need to make sense of why they no longer have the same level of access to you. This is why silence can be more powerful than confrontation. When you argue, when you explain yourself, when you keep chasing, you give them all the answers they need. But when you say nothing, when you simply remove your energy, they are left with their own thoughts. And it is in that silence that their mind starts to work against them. They start assuming the worst, wondering what you are thinking, questioning whether they made a mistake, and realizing that they no longer have control over the situation. This mental loop becomes exhausting for them because the human brain hates uncertainty. It wants closure. And when it doesn't get it, it keeps revisiting the situation, trying to piece together the missing details. What makes this process even more intense is the fact that people expect a reaction. They expect you to respond in some way, whether through words, actions, or emotions. They expect an argument, a message, a plea, or some indication that you are still emotionally invested. But when they get nothing, when you simply go silent, it disrupts their expectations entirely. They don't know how to react because they have nothing to work with. And this lack of response forces them to think about you even more, because now they have to question everything they thought they knew. People underestimate the power of being unbothered. When you show that you are unfazed, that their actions do not shake you, it creates a level of intrigue that they cannot ignore. They may not consciously admit it, but deep down, they wonder why you are no longer reacting the way they expected. They wonder if they ever had as much control over you as they thought. They start feeling the weight of their own actions because for the first time, they are left alone with the consequences. And this realization makes them more aware of how much your presence actually matters. The mind clings to unfinished stories. When something feels unresolved, it lingers in a person's thoughts longer than something that has been neatly closed off. This is why people remember the relationships that ended without proper closure more than the ones that ended in mutual agreement. The unresolved tension, the lingering questions, the missing pieces, these things create an emotional attachment even stronger than love itself. And when you choose to ignore someone rather than react, you create that exact sense of unresolved tension. You become the open-ended chapter in their life that they can't stop thinking about, the situation they keep revisiting in their mind, trying to make sense of what happened. This is why silence often makes people chase. They don't necessarily want to rekindle the connection for the right reasons. They simply want to regain the sense of control they feel they lost. They want to know if they still have an impact on you, if they can still influence your emotions, if they can still elicit a response. It's not always about genuine love or appreciation. It's about their own need for validation. But what they don't realize is that the more they think about you, the deeper they fall into the very emotional attachment they were trying to avoid. The absence of attention creates discomfort. When you were once accessible and suddenly withdraw, the other person is left with an unfamiliar emptiness. At first, they may pretend it doesn't affect them. They may act indifferent, post on social media, or even try to show that they are unbothered, but deep down, the lack of response begins to eat away at them. They start wondering why you're no longer reacting, why you're no longer available, why your attention has shifted elsewhere. This emotional discomfort becomes a trigger that forces them to seek out some form of resolution, even if that means reaching out to you just to see if you still care. The psychological shift that happens when someone realizes they are no longer a priority is profound. It forces them to confront their own behavior, their own role in the situation, and their own feelings about you. They may not have realized your value when they had easy access to you, but the moment that access is removed, everything changes. The same way people don't appreciate good health until they're sick, or the way they don't appreciate peace until they experience chaos, they don't appreciate your presence until they feel your absence. This is human nature, and it plays out in relationships time and time again. The mind amplifies what it cannot have. When you were available, they had no reason to fixate on you. You were there, and that was enough. But when you become scarce, when you pull back, when you stop reacting, the mind starts to magnify your importance. Every memory, every interaction, every detail of your presence suddenly seems more significant. They start questioning why you aren't engaging, why you aren't chasing, why you aren't responding. And in this questioning, they begin to feel something they never expected: regret. Regret for taking you for granted. Regret for not appreciating you when they had the chance. Regret for assuming you would always be there. This regret is not immediate. It builds slowly, like a shadow that grows longer as the sun sets. At first, they may dismiss the feeling, assuming it will pass. But as time goes on and they realize that you are truly detached, the weight of that regret becomes heavier. They may not express it openly, but it lingers in their mind, resurfacing at unexpected moments. And the irony is that the more they try to suppress it, the stronger it becomes. Because the truth is, the absence of something once familiar is one of the most powerful forces of emotional realization. When you step back and focus on yourself, something remarkable happens. You regain your personal power. Too often, people pour their energy into others, seeking validation, hoping for reciprocation, or trying to prove their worth. But the moment you shift that energy inward, the dynamic changes completely. You are no longer operating from a place of need, but from a place of abundance. And that shift is felt by everyone around you, whether they acknowledge it or not. The reason this shift is so powerful is that people are naturally drawn to confidence, independence, and self-sufficiency. When someone sees that you are thriving without them, that you are focused on your goals, your growth, and your happiness, it creates an undeniable attraction. It forces them to question their role in your life. They begin to wonder why they no longer hold the same space in your world. They wonder if they have lost their influence, if you have moved on, or if they were never as important to you as they once believed. This questioning is where the real impact begins. When you stop chasing, when you stop waiting, when you stop overextending yourself for someone who doesn't appreciate you, you send a clear message, not to them, but to yourself. You affirm that your worth is not determined by someone else's validation. You recognize that your time and energy are valuable, and most importantly, you take back the power that you may have unknowingly given away. This power is not loud, it's not boastful, and it's not about proving anything to anyone. It is a quiet, unshakable confidence that radiates from within. People can sense when you have shifted your energy. They can feel when you are no longer emotionally dependent on their attention, and this realization unsettles them. When someone expects you to be available, to always respond, to always show that you care, they grow comfortable in that dynamic. They believe that no matter what they do, you will always be there, always waiting, always hoping for their attention. But when you remove that certainty, when you stop responding in the way they expect, it disrupts their sense of control. They no longer know where they stand with you, and that uncertainty is deeply uncomfortable for them. The moment you stop investing so much of your time and energy into someone else and instead invest in yourself, you change the way people perceive you. They begin to see you as someone who values themselves, someone who does not settle, someone who is content on their own. And that is when they start to feel your absence in a way they never expected. It's not just the loss of your presence that affects them. It's the realization that you are no longer seeking theirs. This realization forces them to reassess their own feelings, their own priorities, and their own place in your life. When you focus on yourself, your entire aura changes. You start to walk differently, talk differently, and carry yourself with a new level of confidence. You no longer seek approval because you have given yourself permission to be enough as you are. And when you reach this level of self-assurance, you become magnetic. People want to be around you, not because you need them, but because your energy is powerful. They feel drawn to you in a way they never did before because they can sense that you are operating from a place of strength rather than desperation. This shift does not mean you become cold or distant. It does not mean you stop caring or turn into someone unapproachable. It simply means that you prioritize yourself first. You stop making people the center of your world and start making yourself the foundation of your own life. And when you do this, you attract people who respect that, who admire that, who recognize your value not because you demand it, but because you embody it. When someone realizes that you are no longer affected by their presence or absence, it triggers something deep within them. It forces them to confront their own feelings, their own insecurities, and their own fears. They may try to regain your attention, to pull you back into the dynamic where they felt safe and in control. They may suddenly become more interested, more engaged, more present. But the difference now is that you are not easily swayed. You are no longer operating from a place of lack, but from a place of wholeness. This is the true power of focusing on yourself. It is not about manipulation, not about making someone feel your absence just for the sake of it, but about genuinely reclaiming your energy and directing it toward your own growth. When you do this, you become someone that people respect, someone they don't want to lose, someone they see as valuable, not because you told them so, but because your actions, your presence, and your confidence make it undeniable. The beauty of this transformation is that it is not dependent on anyone else. It is a decision you make for yourself a commitment to your own well-being. It is the realization that you do not need to prove your worth to anyone, because the right people will recognize it without you having to fight for their attention. And once you embrace this mindset, you will see just how much changes, not only in the way others treat you, but in the way you see yourself. The moment you stop reacting, you take away the control over your emotions. People often expect a reaction, whether it's anger, sadness, desperation, or even just a small sign that you still care. They rely on your emotional response as a way to measure their significance in your life. When you refuse to give them that satisfaction, when you remain completely unbothered, they are left in a state of confusion. They begin to question their own importance, and that questioning becomes their biggest source of discomfort. Silence is a response, and it is often the most powerful one. Words can be argued with, twisted, or misinterpreted, but silence is undeniable. It forces a person to sit with their own thoughts, their own assumptions, and their own insecurities. When someone reaches out to provoke you, whether through manipulation, guilt, or even charm, and you do not respond, they are left with nothing to hold on to. It is human nature to seek validation, even in conflict. But when you do not engage, you remove that validation completely. Most people do not realize how much power they give away by reacting emotionally. When you lash out, explain yourself, beg for understanding, or try to make someone see your worth, you are handing them control. You are showing them that their actions have an effect on you, that they have the ability to dictate your emotional state. But when you remain calm, detached, and indifferent, you shift that power back to yourself. Suddenly, they're the ones feeling uncertain. They're the ones wondering if they miscalculated your feelings, if they underestimated your strength, if they have lost their influence over you. This is why ignoring someone can be so impactful. It is not about playing games or being manipulative. It is about setting a boundary that says, you no longer have access to my energy. And that boundary is what makes them feel the weight of your absence more than any words ever could. When a person is used to having unlimited access to you, when they are used to you always responding, always being available, always showing that you care, the moment you withdraw that access, it creates a void. And that void is unsettling for them. At first, they may not acknowledge it. They may act as if they do not care, as if your silence does not affect them. They may even pretend to be unbothered, posting on social media, surrounding themselves with distractions, or trying to make it seem like they have moved on effortlessly. But deep down, they feel it. And the longer you remain silent, the stronger that feeling grows. The reason silence works so well is that it forces a person to reflect. When someone is constantly receiving your energy, they have no reason to question their behavior. They do not need to think about what they have done, how they have treated you, or what role they played in the situation. But when you remove yourself completely, they are left with only their own thoughts. They start replaying past conversations, wondering where things changed, questioning if they should have acted differently. They may even start to feel regret, not necessarily because they have changed, but because they now feel the loss of the attention they once took for granted. People value what is scarce. When something is always available, it is easily overlooked. But when that same thing is suddenly out of reach, its value increases. This is true in every aspect of life, whether it's relationships, friendships, opportunities, or even material things. The less accessible something is, the more people want it. This is why some of the most sought individuals are the ones who do not chase, who do not beg, who do not overextend themselves to be seen. They know their worth and they do not feel the need to prove it to anyone. Your silence forces them to see you differently. They begin to realize that you are not as easily influenced as they thought. They see that you are not desperate for their attention. They recognize that you are capable of walking away, of prioritizing yourself, of not needing them to validate your worth. And this realization makes them feel uneasy. because they expected a different response. They expected you to fight for their attention, to reach out, to react in a way that reassured them of their importance. But when you do none of those things, they are left wondering. The more time that passes, the stronger this effect becomes. At first, they may assume you will eventually cave in, that you will eventually reach out, that you will eventually break your silence. But when days turn into weeks and you remain unbothered, their thoughts start to shift. They go from believing you are just being stubborn to realizing that they may have truly lost their place in your life. This is when the weight of your absence fully sets in. They begin to feel the emptiness that they never expected. This is the moment when they start to feel regret, not just for what they did, but for underestimating you. They may try to test you to see if they can still provoke a reaction, to see if they can pull you back into their game. But when they realize that their efforts are met with silence, they are left with no choice but to reflect on their own actions. Some may try to come back, reaching out just to see if they can still get your attention. Others may distance themselves even further, too afraid to face the reality that they no longer hold the same power over you. The most important thing to understand is that none of this is about them. It is about you. It is about recognizing that your energy is valuable, that your emotions should not be easily controlled by someone else, that your silence is not a sign of weakness, but a demonstration of strength. When you stop reacting, you reclaim your power. You show that you are not dependent on anyone else for your happiness, for your sense of self-worth, for your inner peace. And when you master this, you become unstoppable.